Lock the doors!
For 3 years, the Duke of Penrith sat rotting in a gilded wheelchair, a prisoner of his own shattered spine. His heirs circled his estate like ravenous wolves, but when a terrified maid spilled boiling Earl Grey onto his paralyzed lap, a terrifying miracle occurred. He stood up. The year was 1887, and Highcliffe Manor was a house drowning in its own shadows. Nestled against the jagged coastline of Cornwall, the sprawling estate was a monument to the Montgomery family's staggering wealth. But for the past 3 years, it had functioned as little more than a breathtakingly opulent mausoleum. At the center of this suffocating world was Alistair Montgomery, the Duke of Penrith. At 32, Alistair was a man whose formidable reputation had been abruptly violently severed. Once a towering, broad-shouldered aristocrat known for his ruthless business acumen and unmatched skill in the saddle, Alistair was now a ghost, haunting his own halls. A catastrophic fall from his prize stallion during a fox hunt had supposedly severed his spinal cord. The physicians had declared him a permanent paraplegic, doomed to spend the remainder of his days strapped to a mahogany and brass wheelchair. In his incapacitation, the vultures had descended. His cousin, Lord Percival, and Percival's dangerously ambitious wife, Lady Catherine, had moved into the East Wing. Under the guise of assisting the crippled Duke, they had systematically commandeered his estate, his ledgers, and his authority. Charlie Hayes knew none of this political treachery when she arrived at Highcliffe. 21 years old, sharp-featured, and driven by a desperate need to pay for her younger sister's tuberculosis treatments at a Swiss sanatorium, Charlie was merely grateful to secure a position as a parlor maid. She was a girl forged in the unforgiving soot of the northern coal towns, observant, pragmatic, and remarkably unbothered by the superficial grandeur of the aristocracy. However, within 3 weeks of scrubbing fireplaces and polishing silver, Charlie realized that something was rotting beneath the floorboards of Highcliffe Manor. She noticed it in the subtle, cruel ways Lady Catherine dismissed the Duke's dietary requests. She saw it in the way Dr. Horace Linfield, the family's resident physician, administered Alistair's daily tinctures, his hands trembling slightly as he poured thick, cloudy liquids down the silent Duke's throat. Most of all, she noticed it in Alistair himself. The Duke rarely spoke. His jaw was perpetually locked, his pale, striking face covered in a sheen of cold sweat. His eyes, however a piercing, storm-glass blue, missed absolutely nothing. They were the eyes of a trapped predator, burning with a silent, agonizing rage. The breaking point arrived on a violently stormy Tuesday afternoon in late November. Charlie had been tasked with serving the afternoon tea in the main drawing room, a cavernous space lined with mahogany bookshelves and dominated by a roaring hearth. Lord Percival sat at Alistair's antique writing desk, brazenly signing legal documents with the Duke's own wax seal. Lady Catherine was draped over a velvet chaise lounge, sipping sherry. Alistair sat near the fire, a heavy tartan blanket draped over his motionless legs. He looked skeletal, his skin pallid from a lack of sunlight, his powerful frame diminished by the slumped posture he was forced to maintain. "Make sure you press the seal firmly, Percival," Lady Catherine murmured, lazily examining her manicured nails. "The London bankers are becoming terribly pedantic about Alistair's signature." "I have it handled, my dear," Percival replied smoothly, not even glancing at his paralyzed cousin. "By Friday, the transfer of the shipping conglomerates will be complete. It is a mercy, really. Alistair is in no condition to manage such stressful affairs." By the fire, Alistair's jaw flexed. Charlie, balancing a massive, ornate silver tray laden with a steaming porcelain teapot, teacups, and pastries, watched the exchange with quiet disgust. Her grip on the heavy silver handles was already slipping. She had been working since 4 in the morning, and her muscles screamed in protest. "You there, girl?" Lady Catherine snapped her fingers at Charlie. "Bring the Duke his tea, and do make sure Dr. Linfield's drops are in it. He looks excessively agitated today." "Yes, my lady," Charlie murmured, her voice steady despite the furious pounding of her heart. She approached the Duke. The teacup rattled slightly against the saucer. She poured the dark, fragrant Earl Grey, the steam billowing into the frigid air of the room. She reached into her apron for the small amber vial Dr. Linfield had given her, uncorking it to add the sedative drops. As she stepped closer to Alistair's chair, her sensible leather shoe caught the edge of a thick Persian rug. It wasn't entirely an accident. Charlie would later swear she saw Lady Catherine's silk-slippered foot subtly extend from the chaise lounge, deliberately hooking the edge of the carpet just as Charlie passed. Charlie pitched forward. The massive silver tray tilted. Time seemed to fracture into agonizingly slow shards. The heavy porcelain teapot toppled, its lid flying off. A torrent of freshly boiled, scalding hot tea cascaded through the air, bypassing the teacups and violently splashing directly onto Alistair Montgomery's lap. The boiling liquid soaked instantly through the thick tartan blanket and the wool of his trousers, searing into the flesh of his thighs. Charlie dropped the tray. The silver hit the hardwood floor with a deafening, echoing crash that shattered the quiet of the drawing room. "You stupid, clumsy wretch!" Lady Catherine shrieked, shooting up from the chaise lounge. Percival dropped his pen, standing up in performative outrage. "Good God, woman. You've practically boiled him alive. Call the valet to clean this up. He can't even feel it." But Percival's words died in his throat. Alistair Montgomery's head snapped up. His chest heaved with a sudden, violent intake of air. His hands, which had sat limp and useless on the armrests for 36 months, suddenly curled into white-knuckled fists. The wood of the armrests groaned under the sudden immense pressure. Charlie scrambled backward on her hands and knees, her breath catching as she stared at the Duke. Alistair's eyes were wide with a blinding, blinding pain. But beneath the pain was something far more terrifying. Unadulterated fury. The searing heat of the boiling water had acted like a lightning strike to a dead nervous system. Slowly, agonizingly, the Duke of Penrith shifted his weight. His heavy boots scraped against the floorboards. His muscular arms locked, the veins bulging against his pale skin as he pushed downward. "Alistair?" Percival whispered, his face draining of all color. "Alistair, what? What are you doing?" The Duke didn't answer. With a guttural roar that seemed to tear itself from the very depths of his soul, Alistair Montgomery stood up. He didn't stumble. He didn't waver. He rose to his full, imposing height of 6'3", towering over the wheelchair that had been his prison. The tartan blanket fell away, pooling around his boots. The boiling tea continued to steam from his trousers, but he barely seemed to notice. The stooped, broken man vanished, replaced by a dark, looming leviathan of vengeance. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Lady Catherine let out a strangled, breathless squeak, clapping a hand over her mouth. Percival took a terrified step backward, his back hitting the writing desk. Alistair slowly turned his head. His piercing blue eyes locked onto his cousin. Then he looked down at Charlie, who was frozen on the floor amidst the shattered porcelain and spilled tea. The Duke's chest rose and fell. He turned his gaze toward the heavy double doors of the drawing room. When he spoke, his voice was not the weak, raspy whisper of an invalid. It was a dark, resonant baritone that commanded the very air in the room. "Lock the doors." Charlie couldn't move. Her brain was completely paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of the scene before her. The paralyzed Duke was standing. Not only standing, but radiating a lethal energy that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. "I said," Alistair growled, his voice dropping an octave as he stepped over the shattered teapot. His movements stiff but undeniably powerful. "Lock the doors." When Charlie remained frozen, Alistair bypassed her. He strode across the room, the heavy thud of his boots sounding like a death knell in the quiet manor. He grabbed the brass handles of the heavy oak double doors, slammed them shut, and turned the massive iron key, pocketing it in his waistcoat. "Alistair," Percival stammered, his voice trembling so violently he sounded like a child. "Alistair, dear cousin, this is a miracle. The heavens have blessed us. You can walk." "Shut your mouth, Percival," Alistair said softly. The quietness of his tone was far more terrifying than if he had shouted. Alistair slowly turned back to face the room. He walked toward the desk, his eyes fixed entirely on the forged documents Percival had been signing. With a sudden, explosive movement, Alistair swept his arm across the mahogany surface. Inkwells, ledgers, and freshly signed contracts went flying, crashing into the fireplace and scattering across the floor. Percival shrieked, throwing his arms over his head and sinking to his knees. Lady Catherine was entirely mute, plastered against the wall as if trying to merge with the wallpaper. Alistair gripped Percival by the collar of his tailored suit, hauling the smaller man off the ground with terrifying ease. "A miracle?" Alistair whispered, leaning in so close that Percival had to look directly into his furious eyes. "Is that what we are calling it? Tell me, cousin, does a miracle explain why Dr. Linfield has been lacing my tonics with belladonna and heavy opiates for the past 2 years? Does a miracle explain why every time I felt the life returning to my legs, a new, stronger dosage was forced down my throat to keep me pliable?" Percival sputtered, tears of pure terror leaking from his eyes. I don't know what you mean. Linfield is a professional." Alistair threw Percival to the floor with an expression of profound disgust. He turned his attention back to the center of the room, to the maid who was still kneeling amid the wreckage of the tea service. He walked toward Charlie. She instinctively shrank back, but she forced her chin up, refusing to cower like the aristocrats. Alistair stopped right in front of her. He crouched down, his large, calloused hand reaching out to grip her chin. His touch was burning hot, his grip firm but strangely gentle as he forced her to look him in the eye. "And you," he murmured, his eyes searching hers. "Who are you?" "Charlie," she rasped, her throat tight. "Charlie Hayes. I'm a parlor maid, Your Grace." "Did my cousin pay you to dump boiling water on me, Charlie Hayes?" he asked, his thumb lightly tracing her jawline. "Was it a test? To see if the cripple would flinch?" Charlie's fear suddenly evaporated, replaced by a sudden spark of indignity. She slapped his hand away. "If I wanted to test you, Your Grace, I would have used a pin. If I wanted to kill you, I would have used arsenic. I am exhausted. My shoes are worn bare. And Lady Catherine tripped me. I spilled the tea because I am poor and tired, not because I am a bloody assassin." Alistair stared at her. For a long, tense moment, the room held its breath. And then, shockingly, the Duke of Penrith laughed. It was a dark, rusty sound, a laugh that hadn't been used in years. He stood up and offered her his hand. Charlie stared at it for a second before taking it. He pulled her to her feet effortlessly. "You are observant, Miss Hayes," Alistair said, his eyes gleaming with a newfound calculation. "More observant than my dear family here." Alistair stepped away from her and paced the length of the room. The stiffness in his legs was visible, but he was rapidly working through it. "My spine was injured in the fall, yes," Alistair addressed the room, though his eyes kept darting to Charlie. "But it was not severed. The paralysis was temporary. A spinal shock. By the 6th month, I could wiggle my toes. By the 8th month, I could stand. But the moment I shared this joyous news with my physician, the heavy sedation began." He turned a chilling glare on Catherine. "Linfield kept me paralyzed with chemicals, kept my mind in a fog so thick I couldn't string 2 thoughts together. It took me a year to realize I was being poisoned. I stopped swallowing the pills. I kept the liquid under my tongue and spat it into my handkerchiefs. I feigned the paralysis, waiting to see exactly how deep the rot went in my own house." He looked down at his soaked, tea-stained trousers. "But the opiates were still in my system from yesterday's forced dosage. I couldn't break the lethargy today until Miss Hayes provided a highly motivating shock to my nervous system. Percival, still on the floor, began to sob. Alistair, please. We only wanted to manage the estate. You were incapable. I am quite capable now, Alistair said coldly. He pulled the heavy iron key from his pocket and tossed it into the air, catching it smoothly. He looked at Charlie. He took a step closer to her, invading her personal space. He smelled of bergamot, rain, and raw masculine power. Miss Hayes, you have stumbled into a den of vipers. You have two choices. You can walk out of that door, be fired by my cousin by nightfall, and likely meet a tragic accident on the cliffs before you reach the village. Charlie swallowed hard. And the second choice? Alistair leaned down, his lips mere inches from her ear. You work for me, directly. I cannot walk out of this room as a healed man. If I do, Linfield will simply switch to a lethal poison, and Percival will hire men to finish the job before I can reach the magistrates in London. I need evidence. I need the forged ledgers. I need the letters they've been sending to my bankers. And I need someone who can move through this house unseen. Charlie looked at the towering Duke, then at the cowering, pathetic figures of his relatives. A dangerous thrill raced down her spine. You want me to be a spy. I want you to be my partner, Alistair corrected softly, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. You help me take back my life, and I will ensure you and your family never have to worry about copper coins again. Charlie thought of her sister, coughing blood in a cold room. She looked back at Alistair. What do we do? Alistair smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile. First, Alistair said, turning to Percival and Catherine, we established the new rules. You two will tell no one of what happened here. If you whisper a word to Linfield, if you attempt to flee this estate, I will break both of your legs myself and throw you into the sea. Do you understand? Percival nodded frantically. Catherine looked away, her face tight with suppressed fury, but she too gave a stiff nod. Good, Alistair said. He walked back to his overturned wheelchair. He righted it with one hand. He looked at Charlie. Scream, Miss Hayes. Tell them the Duke is having a seizure from the burn. Before she could fully process the command, Alistair Montgomery collapsed back into the mahogany chair. His body instantly went limp, his jaw locking, his eyes rolling back slightly as he resumed the flawless facade of a broken, paralyzed man. Charlie took a deep breath. She looked at the locked door, threw her head back, and let out a blood-curdling, terrified scream. Footsteps began to thunder down the hallway. Fists began to pound on the heavy oak doors. The game had begun. Over the next fortnight, Highcliffe Manor became a theater of the absurd, cloaked in an atmosphere of suffocating tension. The daily routine appeared completely unchanged to the oblivious staff. Dr. Horace Linfield continued his grim charade, measuring out the heavy opiate tinctures with clinical detachment. Lord Percival and Lady Catherine maintained their facade of sympathetic guardians, though their eyes now darted nervously toward Alistair whenever they entered the drawing room. They were terrified of the sleeping Leviathan, uncertain if the paralyzing potion was truly working, or if the Duke was simply biding his time. Alistair played his part with a masterful, chilling precision. He sat slumped in his mahogany wheelchair, his storm-glass blue eyes clouded and vacant, his jaw slack. He allowed them to patronize him, to speak of him as if he were already a ghost haunting his own legacy. But the moment the heavy double doors closed and the room was empty save for Charlie, the entire illusion shattered completely. Charlie Hayes proved to be an exceptionally gifted conspirator. Her lowly status as a parlor maid rendered her virtually invisible. She moved through the grand, shadowed halls of Highcliffe with the silent grace of a ghost, carrying feather dusters and polishing cloths as her perfect cover. While the family dined in the opulent banquet hall, she was crawling beneath Lord Percival's massive oak desk. Using a specialized iron skeleton key Alistair had secretly provided from a hidden compartment in his wheelchair, She meticulously copied the contents of Percival's private correspondence. The depth of the betrayal was absolutely staggering. Percival was not merely usurping the estate, he was dismantling it piece by piece. She uncovered letters addressed to representatives at the prestigious Coutts and Co Bank in London, detailing the imminent fire sale of Alistair's massive shipping fleet at a fraction of its true value. Percival was actively funneling the illicit proceeds into untraceable private accounts in Geneva, preparing to vanish before the inevitable collapse of the Montgomery Empire. Every midnight, when the manor was consumed by a heavy, unbroken silence, Charlie would slip into the Duke's private chambers. These secret meetings became the singular focal point of their perilous existence. Alistair would be waiting for her, standing tall and imposing by the roaring fireplace, holding a crystal glass of amber whiskey. The sheer physical presence of the man was intoxicating. Away from the watchful eyes of his captors, he moved with the predatory grace of a caged panther. They would pore over the documents she had pilfered, their heads bent close together under the dim, flickering light of a single kerosene lamp. Charlie would constantly catch the faint, masculine scent of bergamot and wood smoke that clung to his velvet smoking jacket. She noticed the way his gaze would intentionally linger on her hands as she traced the forged signatures, the intense, smoldering heat in his eyes that had absolutely nothing to do with revenge. He was a man starved of genuine human connection for 3 agonizing years, and Charlie was the blazing spark that had reignited his dormant soul. He intends to finalize the Coutts & Co. transfer by the 28th of December, Charlie whispered one freezing evening, handing him a hastily scribbled transcription. The bank manager, a Mr. William Gladstone, is arriving personally to witness your signature on the final deed of sale. Percival plans to heavily sedate you, guide your hand with a pen, and claim you are simply too weakened to speak. Alistair's jaw clenched, a muscle feathering furiously in his cheek. He took the paper from her, his fingers deliberately brushing against hers. A sudden, electric thrill shot up her arm. Gladstone is a pedantic old fool, Alistair murmured, his deep baritone rumbling beautifully in the quiet room. But he is rigidly lawful. If he sees me completely incapacitated, he might delay the transfer. Percival is taking a colossal risk. He is growing desperate. Dr. Linfield is exponentially increasing the dosages, Charlie warned, her brow furrowing with genuine worry. I saw him mixing the tincture this afternoon. It was twice as dark as usual. He intends to ensure you are entirely compliant when the banker arrives. If you do not swallow it, they will know you are faking. But if you actually do, the poison might genuinely kill you. Alistair stepped closer to her, invading her personal space until she had to tilt her head back to meet his piercing gaze. He reached out, his large, warm hand gently cupping the side of her face. His thumb traced her cheekbone with a startlingly tender reverence. You have risked everything for me, Charlie. You have given me the precise weapon I desperately need to destroy them entirely. But I will not allow you to be caught in the crossfire. Tomorrow morning, before Gladstone arrives, I want you to pack your belongings and leave Highcliffe. Take the carriage to the train station. No, Charlie said, her voice surprisingly firm, refusing to break eye contact. I am not leaving you. We started this together. I will see it finished. It will be incredibly dangerous, Alistair warned, his voice dropping to a husky, intimate whisper. When I spring this trap, Percival will be backed into a corner. A desperate man is a truly deadly animal. I survived the soot and starvation of the northern factories, she replied fiercely, her chin jutting out in sheer defiance. I am absolutely not afraid of a pampered aristocrat in a tailored suit. Alistair smiled, a slow, devastatingly handsome expression that made her breath catch painfully in her throat. No, he said softly, I do not believe you are afraid of anything in this world. He leaned down, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought he was going to kiss her. His lips hovered mere millimeters from hers, his breath warm against her skin. But instead, he gently pressed his forehead against hers, a profound gesture of trust and silent affection. We spring the trap tomorrow, bring the real inkwell, and Charlie, make absolutely certain the drawing room doors are properly oiled. We want them to close swiftly. The night before the banker's arrival was unequivocally the longest of Charlie's life. She lay in her narrow, freezing bed in the servants' quarters, her heart hammering relentlessly against her ribs. The magnitude of what they were about to attempt was absolutely terrifying. If they failed, Alistair would be permanently institutionalized or murdered, and she would undoubtedly hang for conspiracy against the nobility. Yet, when she closed her eyes, she did not see the gallows. She saw Alistair's piercing blue eyes, the protective heat of his touch, and the unyielding strength of a man who had conquered his own paralysis through sheer, indomitable force of will. Morning finally dawned, cold, gray, and pregnant with impending snow. The grand stage was perfectly set. The treacherous players were taking their final positions, entirely unaware that the script had been radically rewritten. The final, brilliant act of retribution had finally begun. The afternoon brought biting frost. Mr. William Gladstone of the esteemed London Bank was ushered into the drawing room, looking out of place. Lord Percival greeted him with an oily smile. Lady Catherine hovered anxiously. Dr. Linfield stood silently clutching his medical bag. Centered beneath the grand chandelier sat Alistair. He was a masterpiece of tragedy. His head slumped forward, a blanket draped over motionless legs. He looked completely defeated. Charlie stood quietly by the sideboard. Her heart was beating fiercely. She watched Percival smoothly present the towering stack of legal documents to Gladstone. "As you plainly see, my cousin has tragically deteriorated," Percival stated with false sorrow. "He is barely lucid. I shall legally guide his hand for the signature." Gladstone frowned, adjusting his spectacles. "This is highly irregular. Your Grace?" Gladstone stepped forward. "Your Grace, do you comprehend the nature of these documents?" Alistair remained perfectly still, slowly letting out a raspy exhale. Percival sighed confidently. "It is entirely useless, Mr. Gladstone. Let us proceed." Percival walked swiftly toward Alistair, uncapping his pen. He reached out to grasp the hand of his cousin, intending to forcibly guide the permanent signature. That was the exact moment the trap violently snapped shut. As their fingers brushed, Alistair shot his hand out with blinding speed. He seized the wrist of Percival in an inescapable grip. The silver pen clattered loudly to the floor. Percival abruptly let out a strangled gasp, his eyes widening in absolute horror. "I fully comprehend the documents, Mr. Gladstone," Alistair declared. His voice rang aggressively through the room with the thunderous authority of a sovereign king forcefully reclaiming his rightful estate. Alistair slowly lifted his head. His piercing blue eyes locked onto the terrified banker. Then, with unimaginably powerful motion, the true master forcefully pushed the blanket aside, planted his heavy boots firmly on the floorboards, and stood up. Lady Catherine shrieked. Dr. Linfield instantly dropped his bag, turning frantically toward the heavy doors. But Charlie was already waiting there. She quickly pulled the heavy doors shut, turned the iron key, and safely slipped it into her apron. She happily offered the horrified doctor a triumphant smile. "What is the meaning of this?" Gladstone sputtered, staggering backward. "The meaning," Alistair said coldly, painfully crushing the wrist of his cousin, "is that you are witnessing the apprehension of a massive fraud. Charlie, the true ledgers, if you please." Charlie walked forward, pulling transcribed letters and real ledgers from beneath the sideboard. She handed them directly to the stunned banker. "You will immediately find details of the illicit accounts, securely hidden in Geneva, sir, along with the copious purchases of lethal belladonna." Percival dramatically fell down to his knees on the floor, openly weeping. "Alistair, please, I beg you. It was entirely the idea of Catherine." "Absolute silence," Alistair commanded. "Mr. Gladstone, Inspector Harrington is waiting patiently in the foyer. Would you kindly fetch him now?" Charlie carefully unlocked the heavy doors. Within short moments, The large room was completely filled with uniformed officers. Percival, Catherine, and Linfield were aggressively dragged away in heavy iron chains, their desperate protests echoing pitifully down the cold, dark halls. When the chaos settled, the room was empty save for Alistair and Charlie. The master walked slowly toward her, no longer a broken man, but a towering force of nature. He stopped directly before her, gently reaching out to softly trace her delicate jawline. "You did brilliantly today, Miss Hayes," he murmured. "We did it, Your Grace," she smiled back. "Alistair," he corrected softly, affectionately pulling her firmly into his incredibly strong embrace. "To you, my brave girl, it will definitely always be Alistair." If you were absolutely captivated by this thrilling historical romance of betrayal, courage, and ultimate revenge, please hit that like button right now. Share this incredible story with your friends who love a brilliant plot twist and a fiercely strong heroine. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another dramatic tale of forbidden love and dark aristocratic secrets. Drop a comment below telling us your favorite moment from this stunning conclusion today.
Hi, my name is Outlaw Romance, the owner and manager of Outlaw Romance. After watching the video, the maid spilled tea on the paralyzed duke, he stood up and commanded, "Lock the doors." I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the sense of surprise and the way one unexpected moment changed everything. Stories like this remind us that people are often carrying more strength, secrets, or determination than we realize at first glance. Sometimes a single event can reveal a completely different side of someone. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which moment stood out to you the most? And did your opinion of any character change as the story unfolded? If you were in the maid's position, how do you think you would have reacted in that situation? One small lesson I take from stories like this is not to make quick assumptions about people or circumstances. In everyday life, taking an extra moment to understand what's really going on can sometimes change the way we see a situation. Thank you for spending part of your day with us. If this story meant something to you, feel free to leave a comment. And if you enjoy these historical romance stories, a like or subscription is always appreciated.